Did you know that there are over 15 different varieties of dumplings in Germany, each with their own unique flavor and texture? Many people think that dumplings are hard to make, but in this video, I'm going to show you how easy and rewarding it is to make the most popular types of German dumplings. The first type of dumpling I'm going to show you how to make is bread dumplings. They are perfect anytime you have some stale bread, leftover bread, and in fact in Germany you can even buy specific dumpling bread. It's called Knödelbrot, and I think it's a day old, but it's very specific because it really makes perfect bread dumplings. Bread dumplings are really a beginner perfect recipe, and here I am just cubing some bread rolls that I have made. I do have a recipe on my blog, and I'm going to link that recipe down below in the description box, how you can make your own if you can't find them in the US, because German bread rolls are a little bit different from their American cousins, but you could use many American types of rolls. You just don't want them to be sweet at all because that would not work so well with this recipe. Then I'm slicing and dicing an onion. That adds to the flavor, and I always make sure that my kitchen knife is really sharp. That makes dicing an onion so much easier because then the onion is not going to slip away from underneath you, but actually the knife will cut through the onion. And in a cast iron skillet over some medium heat, I'm melting some butter. Butter makes everything better, right? And I'm just going to quickly saute the onions in the butter and giving that a good stir. Also, the finer you can actually dice the onions, the better it will be for the dumplings. And then over here, I have my German Mezzaluna, which we call Wiegemesser, and I'm chopping some fresh parsley. You can use as much or as little parsley for this recipe as you want, but I always think the more the better, and it gives the dumplings a really nice green color, makes them look really fresh and somewhat healthy, which I guess they are. I have heated up some milk that I'm pouring over the bread cubes, and it's important that the milk is hot because then it will really soak better into the bread cubes. And I have to say it again, stale bread actually works, or a day-old bread works a little bit better than very fresh bread because it's not going to soak up the milk quite as much. And to streamline this recipe, I have put a large pot with water over my stove to heat up while I'm still making the dumplings. And the bread cubes actually benefit a little bit from sitting for 10 minutes with the milk before you add the butter, parsley, onion mixture. But if you're in a hurry, I guess you could make that a little bit sooner. In a small bowl, I'm cracking 2 eggs, and then I'm going to actually whisk up those eggs because I want the egg whites and the egg yolks to be mixed up and twirled a little bit, because then it will be easier to spread that over the bread mixture. And a little bit of fresh ground pepper and some salt. You can also, if you're not queasy, you can try your dumpling dough and see if it actually is seasoned enough for your taste. Just remembering that during the cooking process, it's going to lose just a little bit into the cooking water, but we're going to salt that as well. You also want to mix the mixture really well so that the egg is coating all the little bread cubes. And then you're going to form dumplings. It kind of depends on the size, how big you like them. I like them medium, which is sort of in between. But you can always make a test dumpling and see how it's holding up. The bigger they are, the longer they cook, and I like to make them as even as possible. With a little bit of practice, you will figure this out, how to make that happen. Some people like to weigh their dumplings. I think this is a little bit too much effort on my part. You can just eyeball it, but they will cook a little bit more evenly if you make them the same size. The bread dumplings will actually float on the surface. They will not sink, and you want to add them to not boiling water, but just simmering water. It should be a very gentle boil. In German, we say leise köcheln. So basically, you want a little bit of movement in there, but certainly not boiling, because otherwise the dumplings have a tendency to fall apart. And with a slotted spoon, You can take them out after 20 minutes. You'll have to set a timer. You can't really tell when they're done, but you can always take one out and test them and see if they're done, and then remove the remaining bread dumplings. You also want to make sure that you're draining the water as much as possible, because if you're putting them on a plate and a bowl and they're going to sit in their own water, they're going to soak. And here is a dish with a bunch of melted cheese over the bread dumplings. For my next recipe, the potato dumplings, I have already started boiling 2 pounds of russet potatoes. You want a starchy potato, and they are done when you can insert a knife and it comes out really easily and it goes in easily. Then I'm going to drain the cooking water, and with my favorite kitchen tool, this little potato pick, I'm leaving a link below where you can find it. I'm peeling the potatoes when they are just cool enough to touch, that I'm not burning my fingers. Trust me on that one, potatoes will be easier to boil the warmer they are. And they're also going to be softer. The peel is going to be softer. It just makes your job a whole lot easier, and the peel will come off right away. And I'm just going to peel all my potatoes here, cut out any eyes or black parts, because they will show up on the dumplings later and they're not going to look really pretty. I mean, I guess if you don't trying to impress anybody, it doesn't matter, but I always like to think that things have to look a little bit pretty. With a potato ricer, I am mashing the potatoes, and you also want to make sure not to overwork the potatoes, because otherwise they can get a little gummy and rubbery and tough on the inside. So just enough that no big chunks left. Here's my mashed potatoes. I'm just quickly mixing them up a little bit to see if there are any bigger chunks left that I need to maybe use a fork on. And then I'm adding really good salt. In a recipe with very few ingredients, I would think that the individual ingredients stand out quite a bit. My potato flour and 1 egg. 1 egg is enough. And I guess you could make this a vegan recipe by omitting the egg as well. Now I need to make sure that I mix this really well. I want the egg to be all over the place and everything to be very mixed, thoroughly mixed. And this is what it looks like. Now we'll form the dumplings, and for that I like to wet my hands, and sometimes I have to wet my hands in between each dumpling. It makes it a little easier and they won't stick to your hands quite as much. Again, you could weigh the dumplings to make sure they're all pretty much the same size. I find that eyeballing worked well enough for me. With this recipe, you're going to get about 10 dumplings. I ended up getting 11, and if you weigh them, they should be just about 4 ounces, about 100 grams or so. And you make them really, you kind of press them a little bit together and make sure that you have smooth balls, pretty much even in size, and I'm putting them on a plate. If you're worried about them sticking to the plate, you can also flour your plate a little bit. Same thing here with the potato dumplings as with the bread dumplings. You don't want boiling water. It's okay to dump them into the boiling water, but then you want to lower the heat. The heat is going to decrease quite a bit because you're adding something that's a lot colder, but then definitely make sure that the water is not boiling, but it's just basically a very low simmer. We call it Sieden in Germany. There's a little bit of movement. I tried to capture that, but my lens was getting fogged up from the steam over the pot here. You see there's a little bit of movement. It's more hot than boiling. And this is the reason I like to make my own, because, you know, who knows what's in those that you can buy in a package from the store. After about 20 minutes, they should be floating to the surface of the water. They will be done, and the same idea here. With a slotted spoon, you remove them from the water. And if you're not quite sure if this is your first time making potato dumplings, you can always make a test dumpling to test out your recipe. And if they're falling apart, either the cooking temperature is too high or you need to add a little bit more potato flour. And once you remove these dumplings, you ideally want to serve them right away. They are delicious with some pot roast, a roast goose that I just recently made a video on. I have a video on German rouladen or any deep flavored meat dish. They're just perfect, the side dish, and they are so delicious. You'll never want to buy them from the store again. My third recipe here is actually a sweet recipe, and this brings up so many childhood memories. They are called steamed buns. We call them Dampfnudeln. Sometimes they're called Germknödel, or I guess Dampfnudeln is what they're called. And they are yeast-based and flour-based, so I'm making a little well into my flour, adding the yeast and some sugar to feed the yeast to get it active. It's ideal if you have fresh yeast, but instant dry yeast will work just as well. And some warm milk to get it all going. And a little bit of soft butter. I melted a little bit too much. And then I'm just gonna mix this until I have a uniform dough. Yeast doughs are a little bit different, and I've been thinking about making a sourdough version of this, but you'll have to stay tuned because I know that the yeast version is the one that everybody knows, and it's a lot easier than sourdough. And let me know in the comments below if you would like me to show you how to make a sourdough version of those sweet dumplings. I always like to work my dough a little bit on the kitchen counter. Yeast dough loves being worked, and the more you can do that kneading, the more you can activate the yeast. And then I'll form a round, smooth ball and put it back in its bowl to let the dough rise for about an hour. I like to cover it. And it really helps the dough if you can find a warm place, especially in the winter, for it to rise. Here you can see that it has risen. I can put some dents in it and they won't jump back right away. I like to cut this into 4 equal pieces. And for this recipe, it's not necessary that you weigh them out. I think they're fine if they're not exactly the same size, because the cooking method actually is a little bit different than for the other dumplings and not quite as critical. From these dough pieces, I am going to make 3 round dough balls, and I like to make the surface really smooth and pinch together the bottom so that they don't come apart while they're sitting on the kitchen counter for another 15 minutes or so to just give them a little bit of a rise. And you can also cover them to keep them warm and protected. Now over here on my stove, I am melting more butter, and I'm adding about at least a finger width of water. So that's why we're calling them steamed dumplings. And then some sugar that will create a little bit of sweetness, but also it's going to caramelize the bottom of the dumplings. That makes them so yummy. You'll see that in just a moment when I'm done. Once this is all cooking and completely melted, I'm adding the dumplings to my skillet, and you want to cover them with a tight fitting lid, and especially one that doesn't have any drip spots, because you don't want any steam to drip on the dumplings. After about 20 minutes, they have perfectly risen. They are rounded. They got a little stuck to the bottom because at the end of the cooking process, you will lose the water and it's going to sizzle a little bit differently, and they might stick a little bit to the bottom, but they're caramelized, they're sweet. They're not overly sweet in itself, but you can serve them with a vanilla sauce or butter and some ground poppy seeds on top of it, but you can also serve them with jam, or you can fill them with jam. I think cranberry jam would be fantastic. Plum jam would be really excellent. There's so many different ways you can serve these, and they're not, like I said, they're not overly sweet. They're just a hint of sweet and just the perfect texture. And if I can get this one out, but you can see the caramelized, the little strings that I'm creating here from removing them from the skillet. And here they are, the perfect Dampfnudeln. Let me know if there are any other types of dumplings that I should make a video on. I know there are so many more depending on the region where you are in Germany, and whether they're sweet or savory, potato or bread or flour based. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.